Alright, now that you've learned the basic structure of a neuron, we're going to move on to look at how the three types of neurons are related. So if you look at the big picture, you need to imagine that the blue line actually segregates the central nervous system from the peripheral nervous system. So imagine your hands are here. So it's one of your sensory organs. So this is your hand. Alright. So perhaps you have touched something hot and your hand receives the signal. Nervous impulse is being generated and then transmitted down this way, right, towards the central nervous system. And this neuron, the one that actually transmits impulses towards the central nervous system, is known as the sensory neuron, right? And once impulses have reached the central nervous system, there is this other neuron that takes over the impulse. You can see that this is actually neuron number 1. And we have got neuron number 2 that takes over the nerve impulse through a particular structure. You will learn what's this later. This is known as a synapse. Alright, is what I've just highlighted. So we will learn more about this junction later. But this is essentially a junction that allows transmission of nerve impulses from one neuron to another. This neuron over here, neuron number 2, is known as the relay neuron. And the relay neuron is found specifically only within the central nervous system. After which you see that nerve impulses continue to move downwards, past another synapse. These are the junctions where the neurons will meet, and nerve impulse then moves towards our last neuron that we're going to learn, and that's known as the motor neuron. So I want you to look at the direction of the arrows, right? The arrows move in a unidirectional fashion, okay, and it's going to now move towards the final part where your body actually carries out the response, and this is known as muscle fibers, and muscle fibers are known as effectors in this case. So this entire system from the receptor to the effectors will make up a response, a nervous response. Okay. Now I'm going to go through with you the structure of a motor neuron. So if you were to look and observe at this picture over here, you will see that there are very, very distinct differences between a sensory neuron and a motor neuron in terms of the appearance of the cell bodies, for example, as well as the length of the axons and the dendrons. So if you can look here, you will be able to observe that dendrons on the sensory neuron are very long. This entire portion, which I've highlighted in blue, makes up the dendron. Okay, so dendron, if you remember from my previous video, dendrons are known as parts of the cell that transmits nerve impulses towards the cell body. So you can see that if you are using that definition and you try and look for dendrons here, you'll hardly find any because the cell body is right at the start of the motor neuron. So dendrons are actually really, really short in the motor neuron. Alright, as I've highlighted in blue. Now I'm going to highlight to you in orange the axons for the sensory neuron. Axons, if you recall, is the part of the neuron that transmits nerve impulses away from the cell body. So you can see that this will be the axon. The part that I've highlighted in orange is the axon of the sensory neuron. But if you were to look at the motor neuron, the axon is super long, right? Because every part that is after the cell body is the axon. So you can see that these are the distinct differences between the motor neuron and the sensory neuron. Okay, so the next slide, I'm going to go into detail about the structure of the motor neuron. Okay, so recall, motor neuron transmits nerve impulses from the central nervous system to the nerve effectors. Okay, so this is the motor neuron. You see that nerve impulses start from where the dendrons are, which are really, really short in this case. the dendrites of the dendron. So dendrites are the smaller structures which then combine to form dendrons. Dendrons will then receive the nerve, dendrons will then transmit these nerve impulses to the cell body. Okay. Now the cell body here, you can see it's irregular in shape, unlike that of the sensory neuron cell body is very regular. So that's another difference you can take note of. And now we have got the axons being very long, and they are the nerve fibers that actually carry nerve impulses away from the cell body, and they are very long. You can see that it's super long. Okay. And finally, the dendrites of the axons. Now I need all of you to change this now because it's super misleading. Okay. We don't call it the dendrites of the axon. We will call it the axon terminals. Okay. Axon terminals will transmit nerve impulses to the effectors. In this case, the effectors are the muscle fibers. So these are actually muscle fibers that will carry out the action that you desire. Okay? Okay, I'm just going to run through some other parts of the neuron that I haven't covered. So, if you look at the axon, there's actually a layer of fatty substance that actually surrounds the axon, these yellow bits, right? And we call it the myelin sheath. Alright, the myelin sheath is essentially a layer of fatty substance that shields and insulates the nerve fiber, and it actually helps in nervous transmission to take place faster. It helps nervous transmission occur quickly and almost immediately because of the insulation that the myelin sheath provides. Okay, so the myelin sheath is surrounded by a thin membrane known as the neural lemma. So the neural lemma is actually the outermost covering of the myelin sheath. Alright. Now we've got another portion, we call it the nodes of Ranvier. I'm going to highlight it in blue. The nodes of Ranvier are found here at parts of the axon where the myelin sheath does not cover. Okay, so where myelin sheath is absent, the nodes of Ranvier is present. These nodes of Ranvier essentially help to speed up transmission. Okay, all the adaptations of the neuron tend to function to speed up transmission. Alright, so that's how it's adapted to its function. Okay, and the motor end plate here will be the axon terminals, where the axon eventually meets the muscle fibers for the muscles to carry out its action. Okay, once again, I need you to change this dendrite. This is not dendrite, it's actually the axon terminal. Okay.